Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the expansion of absolute monarchical power underneath Louis XIV, right? So now, big thing about it is we are going to pick up right where we left off in class, right? Right when we were talking about the expansion of monarchical power under Louis XIV leading into our first absolutist monarch, right? Now, this is going to be a really, really important flip, so I need to make sure that you are actually paying attention, really, really getting after it, taking good notes, asking questions in class. If you get confused about anything, just let me know if you need any extra help, right? Come see me during S period and stuff like that if you need anything or actually get confused, right? Well, we left off in class, though, talking about the expansion of, talking about some really, really important moments that occurred during the life of Louis XIV when he was just a young kid, right? We talked about the Fronde rebellions, we talked about the end of the 30 Years' War, and the big thing about it is we left off talking about, of course, his legs and stuff like that, and how literally he was like a famed ballerino, right? A ballet dancer. So getting into it, though, we now have to try and understand how the heck is this guy gonna grow to earn himself the moniker of the Sun King, right? And for those of y'all in general that are like, oh, I've never heard of the Sun King before, who talks about this stuff, Mr. Terry, blah, 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 blah. Well, check out this scene from New Girl real quick where literally Jess brings it up.
You have to grovel. I hate groveling. I would have lasted 2 seconds in the court of the Sun King. I think about that all the time.
You do?
Do you know how much I grovel on a daily basis? It is literally obscene.
I know, you got it groveled in the court of the Sun King because literally his power is all his own, right? The thing that we need to understand is we are about to see the growth of a monarch to extreme holy shenanigans power, right? This guy literally could do anything he wanted, and he was the source of the light for his people, right? Is what he believed anyway. He was also the source of authority of his people, and he could literally transcend that of any kind of government bureaucratic stuff, go over the parlements, do whatever he wanted to do, and he did it all the time. But how did he do this is a really, really important question. How was he able to grow his power to be that of an absolute monarch, right? Well, first of all, the number one thing he's going to do when he comes into power is he's going to key in on a specific type of nobility. As we know, when we were talking about in class and stuff like that, there are two types of nobility when it comes to the growth of like absolutist France. There are the robe nobles, and then there are the sword nobles, right? Now, looking at the robe nobles and the sword nobles, we need to understand a couple of really, really important things about them. And the fact of the matter is that you need to know the difference between them all the time, okay? Now, the robe nobles are the ones who actually bought their entire office, of course, when that whole Paulette tax thing actually started up under Henry IV. Robe nobility, big thing about them is they, of course, have their entire earnings inside the crown, and they also work in the parlements of Paris and other districts and things like that. But the thing about the robe nobles and the sword nobles is intrinsically the fact that the robe nobles bought their positions and could pass it on to later generations, whereas the sword nobles, on the other hand, actually earned it through military service and stuff like that. Now, the thing about it, when we're looking at the growth of militaries and things along the like, what Louis XIV needs to do is figure out a way to pit the robe and the sword nobles against one another. And he does this very, very successfully. And he uses his new professional military to do a lot of that work for him, right? So the sword nobles are going to be given positions of officership inside the army to try and keep their power and keep them happy. Another big thing about it as well is with the robe nobility, he also puts them in positions inside the military as well. But on top of everything else, he actually makes them live with him, right? The robe nobles are basically also the petty ones, the ones that want his very, very close advisorship roles. They want to try and climb the ladder. They want to try and get higher up in the bureaucratic system of France. They want to get into these intendant positions if they can get their hands on them, right? So he kind of literally goads them like puppies to impress him all the time and stuff like that. And the robe nobles become those people that basically will lick his boots if he asks them to, whereas the sword nobles are kept happy by actually having positions in the military. Now, on top of everything else, speaking of these robe and sword nobles and stuff like that, now particularly with the robe nobles, number one thing he's going to do is he's going to build the Palace of Versailles, right? Now, he does this, of course, after the Fronde rebellions when he almost dies as a young lad and stuff like that. Of course, as we remember, he was faking sleeping and stuff like that in the Palace of the Louvre. Now, going into it, though, he's going to build the Palace of Versailles. Now, key thing we need to understand about the Palace of Versailles, when we go this summer and stuff like that, something you really need to understand about all these things, which, by the way, I cannot wait for y'all to see it. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's beyond. Beauty is an understatement when you're talking about the Palace of Versailles. Ask Penelope. She's seen it. Now, the thing about it that you need to understand, though, is that the Palace of Versailles is massive, and it's also not in Paris, okay? Paris is, of course, the capital city of France and the largest city body itself. He realized when he was a young kid, I'm going to die if I stay here because the nobles might have access to me at any time. So what he does is he actually uses one of his father's old hunting chateaus, right? Within the Bourbon dynasty, there was a chateau that only originally took up about this much of the original building, right? The very, very, very center part of it. And so So what he does is he actually builds now instead a massive palace, extending off the edges of it, and he does it in what's known as Baroque architecture, right? Do me a favor, write that down. Baroque architecture, B-A-R-O-Q-U-E. Something you need to understand about what Baroque is Baroque is the type of art movement that actually follows immediately the growth of the Renaissance, right? The Renaissance movement is, of course, going to be known for its, like, different variations. It's Northern style, it's Italian style. It's going to bring in, like, Greek and Roman mythological figures. It's going to use bright colors and frescoes and stuff like that all over again. But when we're looking at the growth of Baroque architecture and Baroque architecture and Baroque art actually bring in grandeur, right? What I mean by grandeur is it's massive, it's huge, it's gold, it's big, it's intense, right? And it, like, really, really different because it almost, honestly, was like the wealthy elites of, like, Europe and also the Catholic Church were kind of like taking the art movements back, right? And it wasn't just these, like, paintings anymore of gods and angels. It was now humongous ones that could be three-dimensional at times and stuff like that. Now, when we're looking at the growth of the Palace of Versailles, look at this bad boy. That thing is Baroque as it gets, all right? So now, I love also Baroque architecture and stuff like that because there's actually an allusion to it in Beauty of the Beast as well. Check this out.
And as I always say, if it's not Baroque, don't fix it.
Exactly. If it's not Baroque, don't fix it. Now, getting into it, though, on top of everything else, he also establishes his royal court there. Now, we already know what a court is, right? Court life, of course, relating back to the courtier and stuff like that, of course, by Balthasar Castiglione. The court itself is basically the parties and the get-togethers and the nobles that would suck up to Louis all the time. Well, the thing about it that when we're looking at now, like, his royal court that's built in the Palace of Versailles, it is not a little court anymore. It's a massive one. The Palace of Versailles has over 700 bedrooms inside of it, right? 700 bedrooms. That's ridiculous, right? 700 bedrooms, over 1,200 pieces of furniture, some of them gilded in gold. Some of the actual rooms have gold on the ceilings. The outside has gold on the ceilings. This massive gate actually welcomes you into it and things like that. Now, think about the opulent lifestyle that the nobles that are going to get when they live here. They are having all their meals made for them. They're competing in, like, polo and hunting with the king himself. They're using their close relatability to get close to him all the time, okay? This right here is just the entrance to the Palace of Versailles, which is absolutely ridiculous. There's gold on the roof, y'all. It's absolutely insane. By the way, this gate that actually welcomes you into Versailles and stuff like that, that's the second version because a bunch of pissed off moms actually ripped down the first one. We'll talk about that in the French Revolution, though. And this, of course, is that of King Louis's bedroom, right? That is actually King Louis's bedroom. That was a very, very important location of the symbols of his power, right? Now, going into it, you have to understand, when Louis would wake up every morning, nobles, the richest people in all of France who had purchased their, like, actual wealth and, like, position and things like that, would literally be waiting out for him next to his bed. And when he would wake up, they go, oh, sir, did you have a good sleep? Oh, and then literally some of the most prestigious positions you could have inside of his royal court was helping him put on his shirt in the morning, because that's how close to the king you were getting, right? Do you see what I'm talking about, y'all? He's making them compete for his affection, right? He's making them compete to stay with him in his home because they're being giving, like, free food and free stuff and, like, all this other things like that because he's got so much money. Like, so, like, when we're looking, I mean, like, how many of y'all might have sucked up to him a little bit just to, like, be able to live in the Palace of Versailles? I mean, I'd have done it. So, like, now look, the other big one as well was, like, literally helping him go to the bathroom. That's the one I don't want to do. All right? So, like, that's the one I don't want to do. I don't want to help the man go to the bathroom. I don't need that. But when he would walk down the stairs towards his meals and stuff like that, whole reams of noble families would be waiting for him, like, oh my God. It's a party every day, even at 8 a.m. in the morning. When he went on to his rides, helping him put on his boots and take them off was considered a major position within, like, the actual growth of his royal court. This right here is the queen's bedroom, which, as you can tell, is just as opulent and just as beautiful. And some of you are like, but Mr. Terry, why do they have two different bedrooms, okay? Blah, blah, blah. Now look, check this out, y'all. Something you need to understand is that Louis XIV had so much power that he lived with his wife. He had two wives, by the way, not at the same time, like one after the other, but literally, his two wives were very, very aware and very, very okay with the fact that he had mistresses that lived in Versailles. Like, literally, there was a doorway that was connected to this bedroom that went to another apartment that was bigger than the queen's one that held his official mistress's apartment, right? He literally had the queen live right over across Versailles away from him, where he tried to have kids with this person, and then he had a mistress in his back door. That is ridiculous. That's how much power Louis XIV actually had, right? The thing about it, though, as well, when we're getting into it, he literally would just grow his royal court to massive standings. He would have huge parties and, like, music playing in this particular particular room known as the Hall of Mirrors, right? And of course, a very, very big image of Baroque architecture, all the massive paintings and the gold ceilings and stuff like that, the chandeliers that are worth millions of dollars a piece, I'm sure. I'll have to look up exactly how much they're actually worth. But the Hall of Mirrors becomes a very, very important room in the progression of European history later on. This right here is one of the gardens of the of the Palace of Versailles. He's got fountains, y'all, that are as big as football fields. And the other thing on top of it, he had two, count them, not one, but two theaters to perform his ballets and force the richest people in all of France to come and watch him, right? Like literally, look at all the people just waiting for him as he comes down the stairs. And that's Louis XIV right there, and his royal court would be lining the stairwell to watch him actually deal with every person that came to talk to him. So as you can tell, the Palace of Versailles and his royal court is a very, very important process when you're talking about the growth of his power, right? Now, the other big thing about it that he's going to do as well, he's going to create more robe nobles, right? So instead of just sitting around and using the robe nobles and sword nobles to actually fight against one another and stuff like that, he actually creates more of them, and he encourages more of them to buy into these positions. So literally, by creating more of them, he's making it so their salary is dependent on him. Some also, by the way, he's going to hire new advisors. Some of them not even nobles themselves. Some of them are a part of the burgeoning middle class that's beginning to grow, known as the bourgeoisie. So the thing about it that we're actually need to understand is that by hiring creating more robe nobles and hiring out advisors outside of the nobility, he's basically creating a rat race for his approval. And he also makes noble power and salary dependent upon him. He makes it so literally the nobles will not get like a certain amount of tax breaks. He'll make it so they don't actually also get a lifestyle they want without his necessary condolences, or not condolences, without his necessary, what's the word I'm looking for? Approval, right? So by making all of these noble powers dependent on him, he's forcing all of them to actually understand that you are nothing without Louis XIV. He is everything. And that's why Jess, or aka Zooey Deschanel, is like, oh, I could never grovel. I'm bad at groveling in the court of the Sun King, right? Now, think about it as well, though. This is a big thing also. He also wants religious unity back. Now, interestingly enough, this is a funny little thing that happens. He's also an ardent Catholic, okay? Louis XIV also grew his power because he wanted to get rid of the Protestants, okay? Now, he then, in a very large wholesale move, he revokes the Edict of Nantes. Now, this is huge, okay? We need to understand what this is. We need to star this one in particular when we're talking about it, because by revoking the Edict of Nantes, Louis XIV is basically declaring war on the Protestants themselves. Now, we did see this a little bit already, all right? Some of y'all are like, well, I thought Cardinal Richelieu did this too when he raided La Rochelle. Yeah, well, he actually did. La Rochelle was that city, of course, that famous painting of actual, Cardinal Richelieu standing there with his arms crossed like this, and he's looking off into the distance while French ships actually destroy English ones and bomb this city called La Rochelle. La Rochelle was a Protestant stronghold. So we've seen the upper echelons of the French crown actually go against Protestants regardless of the Edict of Nantes, right? Well, the big thing about it that we need to understand is Louis takes it a step further, and he literally tears the exact document up that his grandfather, Henry IV, actually had written. Now, what is this going to cause, though? This is important to actually know going forward. A bunch of Protestants are going to flee France for cities that actually have, toleration of their people. Some of these cities include places like Amsterdam, Netherlands, and then also includes places like Prussia and stuff like that you'll need to know a little bit later on, all right? Now, getting into it, though, getting rid of these Protestants was a massive move, and revoking the Edict of Nantes is a very aggressive move at that. Now, the other big thing that he's going to do is he wants to make a crap load of money using this new economic concept that's burgeoning throughout the continent, okay? The concept that's been growing ever since the colonial era is an idea known as mercantilism, okay? Now, you need to highlight this, star it, underline it, go circles around it, make it look like it's exploding, because mercantilism is just that important, okay? So mercantilism, what the concept itself, in and of itself, actually means, is it's basically the idea of trying to hoard money as much as you possibly can in your country. But these 6 things, and amongst many other things, including the fact that he loved to go to war, this is another big thing that we'll focus on here a little bit towards the end of this flip. The thing you need to understand, though, is it led to him being super, super arrogant and really, really intense. Do you think there's a very good chance that Louis XIV knows he's the most powerful man in European history up to this point? Yes, he does. And he has a very, very famous quote where literally one of his secretaries of state was up to one of his robe nobles, one of his advisors that actually works with him, came up to him and it's like, sir, what do we do? What do we do about the affairs of the country? People are starving. We are losing food. What do we do about the state? And literally, Louis XIV just looks him dead in the eyes in the face and goes, I am the state! And he just yells, I am the state, in this guy's face. Now, fun fact, in French, you say, laissez moi, which means, the state is me. But also, on top of everything else, he probably didn't say it in real life, which is a really big bummer and really, really stinks. But the big thing about it is, this one quote, even though it is probably fictional, truly defines his entire power and his presence, right? He defines how those 6 things all went together, including also his warfare ideas, to actually give him so much power that you could barely, like, it would cross your eyes, right? Now, on top of everything else, speaking of some of his advisors and stuff like that, that's similar to that advisor that came up and asked him about, like, the affairs of food and taxation and stuff like that. He had one very famous advisor, his economic and financial advisor, a man by the name of Jean-Baptiste Colbert, right? And Jean-Baptiste Colbert is the guy that applied mercantilistic policies to the royal crown so he could build Versailles, so he could go to wars whenever he felt like, so he could literally spend money all the time, left and right, like on opulent mansions all for himself and growing his wealth and his colonial holdings, right? The thing about it, though, is he used mercantilism, which literally, if you want a better kind of description of what it is, it's what is known as a system of economic regulations, okay? So the thing that we need to understand, really, really, really important right now, if you want to go ahead and stop writing that immediately and just write something really, really close next door to this or whatever, basically what it means is the actual country, the crown, or the state, however you want to refer to the government at this time, having direct control over the economy, okay? This is really, really big, all right? So this is when the government will literally, like, of course, at this point, it's an absolute monarch underneath Louis XIV, would directly regulate the economy of France so he could do a couple of things, including hoarding money inside the borders as much as he could, and also preventing businesses and other people from trading with as many people as he possibly could, okay? So this is the entire concept that we need to... No, you're fine. All right, so yeah, we got to focus on a little bit. Mercantilism literally revolves around keeping as much gold and silver inside your country as you humanly can. Now, how do we do this? How do you make that possible? How do you get that done? You actually use these things known as tariffs, right? Hey, Maria, do you know what a tariff is? It is a tax. Look at her go. You want to come in and, like, say hey to my pecans? Because they heard you on the... You'll talk to them later, okay? But real quick, what kind of tax is it?
What is a tariff?
Yeah, what's a tariff? Do you know what a tariff is? Say it loud so they can hear you.
What is a tariff? Can you use it in a sentence?
A tariff? Louis XIV used tariffs to implement his mercantilistic policies.
I guess if you wanted to do business, you had to pay a tax.
Yeah, what kind of tax, though? Tax on imports, or do you think it's a tax on, like, local economics?
I don't know. It's a tax on imports.
Look at her go! She's so smart! Oh my god, it's ridiculous. Tariffs are actually taxes on imports, right? Taxes on imports that actually came from foreign countries, right? So the thing that you need to understand in general is that basically France wanted, or like Jean-Baptiste Colbert and Louis XIV as their economic and fiscal advisors, wanted to actually make sure that you weren't buying goods from anywhere else, right? For example, one of the things that was most heavily taxed was English tobacco, right? Like, so, like, this is a really, really big thing because literally they were making so much money off tobacco that was being grown in the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia. Well, like, France not only is going to put heavy amounts of taxation on that, they're also going to try and grow their own tobacco in the Louisiana colony, and it goes miserable, right? Because they can't get anything to grow because y'all have bugs from hell that live in this, like the state, and it's ridiculous. And they also would, like, the tobacco would usually go bad in the humid environment before it ever got to France. Another big one as well, a little bit later on, is Louis XIV will outlaw the sale of English cotton within France itself. All of these things are mercantilistic policies because he wants you to buy French cotton and French tobacco and French goods and keep all that gold and silver circulating through your own economy. Now, interestingly enough, this is before banknotes and all these other kind of promissory notes that come up, which you call it cash now, right? Like actual paper money came up. The thing about it, though, is because if you actually bought something using French silver from an English merchant, where is that silver now? It's in their economy, and they're going to melt it down and make it into their own money. Do you see what I'm talking about? It's a really, really important concept that you actually wrap your mind around of what mercantilism is and how it's used, okay? Now, going into it, though, also, one of the other big reasons, this you could say is the seventh reason or seventh method that Louis XIV would actually use to grow his power and his dynastic ability to actually rule over that all of France, and it's wars, right? This man loved to go to war. He loved actually being called the warrior king as well, and loved to be called the conqueror, right? So look, the thing that we need to understand is that Louis XIV waged several different wars, okay? Several of them. He actually was at war for 33 out of his 54-year reign. That's another thing we need to actually wrap our minds around about Louis XIV real quick. The man was in power for 54 years, right? Like, so he actually died in 1715, right after the end of one of his most unpopular wars. Now, going into it, though, he loved being at war because he created that professional army, right? He created an professional army with massive amounts of standards, including specific uniforms, guns, rations that would actually be used throughout the entire military. And he also, of course, is going to allow those robe and sword nobles to kind of curry his favor, and they would get special privilege if they were officers in the military. Now, going into it, though, also, Louis's model of, like, of the professional military would actually be replicated like all over Europe. The Prussians would use elements of it, the Russians would use elements of it, and then also, of course, like even the English would use elements of the Louis' professional military that he used to grow his influence throughout the European continent. But his most famous war and his most dreadfully big failure of a war is actually the War of Spanish Succession. Now, it's important to talk about a lot of his different wars and stuff like that, but I only think it's really, really important to talk about this one in particular. Now, he waged a couple of early ones that actually, of course, after the Fronde rebellions and stuff like that are going to really, really kind of define who he is as a person, and he's going to win a bunch of those early wars. For example, like the Franco-Spanish War, he actually has that one, and he wins that one in a very decisive manner. But this one's a big one because it's known as the War of Spanish Succession, right? Now, what ends up happening is the King of Spain died childless. Now, I don't know if y'all remember this guy or not, but that King of Spain that died childless was none other than Carlos II. He becomes the last Habsburg ruler of all of Spain. He's the one that had a Habsburg jaw so bad that he would drool all the time, be like, and he could barely speak and stuff like that. He's the one that like couldn't walk until he was 8 because he was so like literally deformed from all the incestuous relationships that actually produced him. And also, Spanish Habsburgs have been growing weak ever since Philip II, actually, and also because their economy was just in the toilet. All right, so now look, going into it though, so we understand, is that dude's gonna die. Carlos II dies. He never has any kids and stuff like that, and I think we can kind of see why. But what ends up going down is that actually, who is next in line? Louis' grandson, Philip. Louis' grandson, Philip, is actually a Bourbon, right? He's actually a Bourbon, and he is in line to take over the Kingdom of Spain. So through his grandson, whenever his grandson is on his way to becoming king, Louis tries to claim land, colonies, money, and all these different things through his grandson, basically trying to merge the acquisitions, the land, the money, the wealth, and also all the colonial wealth of France and Spain together. Now, what does this do, though? It freaks out the rest of Europe, right? It absolutely scares the pants off the English, the Dutch, the Austrians, and the Prussians, who decide we cannot allow Louis XIV to merge the colonial and economic holdings of Spain and France. Now, ironically enough, the rest of Europe kind of saves France from a massive economic downfall because of this. But like, funny enough, though, it does also kind of like ruin like Louis' reputation. But the English, the Dutch, the Austrians, and the Prussians unite together and go to war against Louis XIV. And after about a 14-year-long war, 14-year-long war, it all comes to a close, and France eventually loses, okay? And when France loses, it all is ended with this thing known as the Peace of Utrecht, right? And Utrecht is actually a city in the Netherlands. They sign this peace document where they then agree to set limits unofficially on the expansion of certain European powers. What you need to understand is that the Treaty of Utrecht did not actually have a line in it that said you cannot grow the blah, 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 blah. It kind of just set a tradition that would endure throughout the rest of European history, where if one country was getting too big and too strong, the rest of the countries would combine together to stop them and form a coalition and be like, nope, not today. And this works out really, really well for most of European history until this guy shows up. Yeah, exactly. That movie's actually coming out pretty soon, which is absolutely bananas. So look, big thing about it, though, when we're looking at it, this kind of whole idea sets the idea that we will unite together to stop the expansion of one ruler if they so try to do that. France is going to lose some territory in North America. They lose Canada, the Strait of Gibraltar, and southern Spain, which actually goes to the English and stuff like that. And rule of Spain does go to his grandson, though. But what it does do is it actually breaks up French hegemony over the entire economic area of like the continental European, or excuse me, of the European continent. And what it does is it also takes Philip out of any secession that relates to France and basically breaks him away from the Bourbons altogether, right? And so Philip V does come to power, but it basically kind of muzzles the like absolutists that are actually hanging out in Spain. Now that are hanging out in France and keeps Louis XIV at bay. Well, the sad thing about it, too, y'all, is that Louis XIV, by this point in his life, is very old, right? By 1713, when this war actually comes to an end, France is, first of all, in a lot of debt because of Louis' spending on wars, and also they're in a lot of debt because literally mercantilism doesn't make you a ton of money, and also because he's been spending it on building palaces and stuff like that for himself. But then in 1715, Louis dies, right? And when Louis dies, the throne passes to his grandson, who's only 5 years old, who will become Louis XV, right? Now, going forward, though, as well, what we need to understand is we are then going to talk about in class, we're going to talk about the decline of the Spanish colonies, right? And we're going to talk about the decline of Spanish power and how literally Europe might have actually saved like Louis XIV and France from a massive economic downfall, because if they had taken on Spain's economy and other colonies and all that stuff like that, Spain wasn't doing that good. So we'll talk about that in class a little bit, but I'll see y'all soon. I hope y'all have a good rest of your weekend. And if y'all have any questions about this stuff, like leading into class, come in and ask me, and we'll totally talk about it at S period, all right? Y'all have a good one.